Can we get back to you two? And because really, I feel like we only left it at that email. Like, I want to see how your relationship grew and developed, how you guys stayed in touch, how that moved forward into actually deciding to get a podcast going.
Yeah, we've never lived in the same city. We've always been kind of long distance friends.
Like we would talk on the phone.
Yeah, occasional visits. You would come down to Virginia. I'd come down to Georgia.
Well, and then I moved to North Carolina for school, and we were about an hour apart at that point. And that's when we started spending more time together, hanging out and listening and stuff. And
yeah, and it's just been that ever since. Just the visits and the communication, constant communication, and really, I think I said it in the first episode of Radical Research, where it just grew out of phone conversations where we'd be like, we'll start with like, hey, let's talk. We're talking about this music, and this is on our mind, and then we go to this thing, and we go to this thing. And really, there's just really not a whole lot of difference between those calls and Radical Research. It's just
such a good feeling when you're just like, hey, dude, check this out. Oh, I love it. Or either they didn't know, they knew it or already and they loved it, or they fall in love with it. And then you're just like, oh, dude, we're just like dancing with music. Like,
and again, I think the bond, I mean, all of my best friends are people I met through music and people I have music in common with. But Hunter and I had this uncanny, we mentioned it before, but it has to be said again, this uncanny parallels, many uncanny parallels with what we liked. It wasn't just, it was outside of metal too, as well as inside of metal. And it just, I just think that we understood each other completely.
Yeah.
Musically.
We have, same sense of humor, like the same, comedy shows.
Can you talk for a little bit about Mean Deviation to the audience here? I don't think many people of our listeners would know about that book, but I've read it, or at least a lot of the sections of it, and I found it to be just mind-blowing to be like, oh, this guy, like, or there's already a book where Cynic is featured, or some of your favorite bands, the listeners of the show.
Oh, we got a frozen professor.
I'm frozen?
Yeah, but
you're good now. You're good
you
now.
said show and it froze, yeah.
I think I did get the gist of you, though. It was basically Ian Christie, who I think everybody knows from Sound of the Beast. And I don't know. I don't know if you guys know Ian Christie, but he does.
I read his Sound of the Beast, too, yeah.
There you go. He started Bazillion Points. And before he even started Bazillion Points, he had been after me to like, you got to write that progressive metal book. Because he knew I was all into like Cynic, Crimson Glory, Fate's War, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was always just kind of like a joke, because like, well, that's great. You want me to write that. And I think I would be a good writer for that. But, who's going to take it? Well, he started Bazillion Points. And as soon as I heard that he started Bazillion, I sent him an email. I was like, I know a writer who has a progressive metal book up his sleeve if you want to take it on. And he was like, well, of course, so that's how that started. It was basically just kind of a way to, it was kind of twofold. One, I just always was kind of the cheerleader for like metal being far more diverse and sophisticated and just artistic than I think a lot of the mainstream might look at it as, right?
Right.
So I was always and I had a natural interest in these highfalutin progressive bands. So I of course I wanted to feature it because of that, but I also wanted to kind of dispel the notion that Dream Theater and bands that sound like Dream Theater are the only things that are called progressive metal, right? I went with a very strict dictionary definition of what progressive means, what it means to be progressive. And I also took some ideas from Frank Zappa without deviation from the norm. Progress is not possible. So that kind of fit into the title. The title was also mathematical. That was kind of the mission. And I think I scored on that, because I've had a lot of people say, I'm so glad that you sort of weren't cheering just for Dream Theater and Symphony X, and you went to Psy, and you talked about K.O.Dot, and you talked about Canvas Solaris, and you talked about Cynic, that was kind of the mission, and
I mean, reading that book, it made me realize that there was so much progressive metal I'd never checked out, never even heard of. It is such a diverse universe. It was very humbling to me, and it made me realize maybe I'm actually not as much of a prog head as I thought I was, because I mean, there's a lot of that stuff that I'm not like super into, but it was like to see my music scene represented as part of a greater thing was super cool.
Yeah.
My aspiration, as I'm sure it would have come up at some point on this pod, is we're the Cali Death Podcast. So I wanted to write a book, still want to write a book on the California death metal scene, and this podcast is kind of the like research for it. But I heard you and Hunter wanted to start your pod. You originally starting your podcast originally wanted to write a book, and then it decided to go with a podcast. And I feel the book kind of slipping away as it's so much easier to just podcast once a week than
kind of.
right.
I was starting to listen to my first podcasts and realizing that we could do what we wanted to do with the book with a podcast. I still want to write that with Hunter though, because and the focus would be purely post black metal, Norwegian weird extreme music. I mean, because that's what Beyond Dawn, In the Woods, Arcturus, I mean, you name it, all of that stuff is a major passion of ours, and was the impetus not only for the book idea but radical research. And we just finished 6 episodes in a row on Norway with radical research, because I just thought at one point, yeah, we've done all these other Norwegian episodes through the life of this thing, but it's time to just kind of go all in for a while. We finally just pulled out of that.